Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. We break down 3 short stories, 1 big story, and wins and losses every week for the city. I'm EJ Carrion with my co-host, Ann Zeta. Boy, do we have a lot to discuss today.
Yeah, we discussed a lot of it before we even started recording, so hopefully it comes back to us as well as we were kind of, bantering about it before we hit the record button.
Yeah, you guys are going to get a lot of me and Ann and I, because both of our significant others are out of town all weekend, so we just had a lot of us time to really...
Yeah, individually, I was sitting in my house reading a lot of articles, sending them to you. You were sitting in your house reading a lot of articles, sending them to me.
Yes.
We both read all of the articles
Yes.
ahead of getting here today. So I think that made it so we had a lot more in our brains and thoughts about these articles.
Yeah. I love the lineup of what we have today. And so let's go ahead and dive in with just an update. This is just an Instagram post from the Mr. Bud Kennedy himself. Basically, he's talking about the True Texas Project event. If you remember that the True Texas Project event was also an event that they had at the Botanical Gardens, this group who has conversations around the Great Replacement Theory, which is a conspiracy claiming that there is a plot against white America. And so as we know that this has happened and that people are participating in this in Fort Worth, there is a list that Bud Kennedy shared of people who actually attended this event. And so this includes people like Carroll ISD board member Andrew Yeager, Tarrant GOB chair Beau French, of course, Judge Jesse Navarez, State Rep David Cooke, criminal court nominee David Schnick, Tarrant County Judge Tim O'Hare. We also have Sheriff Bill Wayborn, and just a couple other state reps and other people. But at the end of the day, how does it make you feel that Tarrant leadership is attending events like this? These are the most powerful groups of positions in our county. Our judge, our sheriff, are showing up to events like this.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think that some of these people who are even more extreme have stepped away from this group and had, disavowed it. And when they heard that certain topics were going to be discussed, separated themselves.
Yeah, Don Huffines.
Exactly. And I think we spoke about that before. I know you did reference a state representative whose name is David Cooke, but that's not David Cooke, our city manager.
Yeah, what's funny is there was a Judge
that.
David Cooke and a state rep David Cooke.
And then we have our city manager, David Cooke.
Which is the big story today, but
So, yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I don't understand why they're doing this. If they are doing this, then they should speak about it. They should be willing to answer questions about it, what it is that they're going there to learn, and what are they planning to bring back to their style of leadership or decision-making process. But they often are quoted in the paper as not responding to requests for comment.
Several of our short stories are going to lead to kind of where do you allow Tarrant County? Because what Tarrant County is doing is double down on being extreme, right? They're attending events like this. They're making changes to our appraisal district model swiftly, which is another big story we're going to discuss. And they're making moves on their agenda where I believe Fort Worth leadership, David Cooke, Maddie Parker, Betsy Price, they're all just sitting on their hands and allowing these people to have these extreme views in a county where we're half the population. And there's no yin and yang from our leadership who runs and operates a more moderate and logical kind of group of people, I guess. And I don't know why there's not more callbacks and call-outs to say this is inappropriate and keep our judge accountable for, that this is not how we should be. These are not things that should be taking up our time.
Yeah, I think that, it goes back in my mind to that partisan, nonpartisan seats that some of these folks sit in. Yeah. And while I was serving in a nonpartisan seat, I was pretty careful to not get myself mired up in partisan politics. But that is not the case anymore. I think that most people have taken public statements on issues that are in partisan hands, that are in those nonpartisan seats. And I haven't seen, like we were discussing before, that former Mayor Betsy Price came out in support of Nikki Haley when she was running. And I haven't seen anything from them since that was no longer an option. And I think that there are folks speaking up that they support, the more extreme positions, and those, like you pointed out, who maybe are more centrist and understand their role in our government to support and represent all of us, are kind of remaining a little silent on some of these topics. And that is extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and we do remember, though, that Maddie did say, like, Beau French tried to make something about the whole banned book thing, and she did say, like, I'm not dealing with this nonsense. And to me, that seems like the strategy they have is like, oh, we, classy Republican Fort Worth is, we're not going to stoop to this level. But I don't know, something about being silent and not calling it out as, this is bad and this is not what it means to be Republican. I mean, to me, that's a simple, hey, everyone on the council from Baylock to Crane and then Maddie and Betsy, and I mean, anyone who's a part of the establishment, Macy, and say, as Republicans, we believe we're here for conservative, whatever traditional financial values, but we don't believe in, we don't support the behaviors.
If they don't speak out, then it just leaves it to people to assume that they do agree with the loudest voice that is being heard, I think.
Yeah.
And like you pointed out on the last pod, if the head of the Tarrant County Democratic Party was behaving in the way that the head of the Republican GOP is behaving in Tarrant County, that you would call them out as a Democrat. You would say that is not in line with my beliefs, and I don't want this person speaking for me. So if there's somebody out there that purports to have the same title and belong to the same group of people as you, and they're speaking loudly and saying things that you don't agree with, I would find it hard to remain silent and not say that I did not agree with that.
If you're going to be the classy, silent conservative, you're seeing, going to our second story, that the Beau French energy is coming towards your city, right? They're talking about DEI. They're talking about the funding that we just hired a diversity consultant that we're paying $150,000 that we expanded the budget for. But, you're having our DEI things that we've put in place, and the people we put in place to work on those things now have a question of, does this department or this role exist in our city? Because now we're playing scared and we're reactionary to this energy from Tarrant County leadership. So I know I kind of brought up the short story number 2, but can you kind of give a little bit more your context of what you're seeing with the diversity and inclusion department and now how Beau French is attacking that?
Basically, these efforts have been kind of under attack from the state level for quite some time. Yeah. And so there was a a Fort Worth Report article. It was a fact brief. Did the city of Fort Worth hire a diversity consultant? And they did indicate that, and they were basing this, I don't know if it was the tweet by Beau French that made them look into this to see if it was true, because he had a very long tweet where he's accusing the city of hiring this consultant and that they're, up to some bad things, and that dug into what she has done in some other places, and is very accusatory. So the Fort Worth Report decided to look into this to see if it was true, and found that, yes, they have hired a diversity consultant, and that they are looking at, the firm is going to run an analysis on businesses and workplace demographics to inform the city officials of population trends. The study will analyze businesses owned by women, minorities, veterans, and service disabled veterans and their role in the city's business development. And the city officials will then have a study that will help deliver services outlined by the business equity ordinance, which is an ordinance that we've had in place for a very long time. So I don't see a problem with doing this because I think it identifies areas where the city is trying to support local businesses run by individuals that have lacked that support in the past. And they're making sure that those dollars go where they need to go and that support goes where it needs to go. So I think all the stuff that Beau French is calling out and saying is bad and terrible is not the case. What this brings me back to, though, is that the city of Fort Worth had a race and culture task force back in 2017. I mean, the years kind of run together, maybe before 2017, I think it was. And some of these initiatives came out of that. And that was a task force made up of community members who saw things that they thought the city should be doing to improve the way they run the city. And one of those things was to have this department. And this department makes sure that all of the departments in the city are meeting the needs of all the citizens of the city. We're a diverse city.
Yeah.
and there are
Majority
people
minority city.
Yes. And many of those minorities are not getting what they deserve. And so this is a department that makes sure that that is not the case, that they are getting what they deserve. And so, like you said, this has been something that's being attacked at the state level, and now it's getting attacked within Tarrant County. And I think a lot of that is because anything that has to do with equity and inclusion as being something that they should be opposed to because it's a woke liberal agenda. And that's, in my mind, I mean, people might accuse me of having a woke liberal agenda, I guess, but yeah. I think that these were things that were very clearly vetted and determined to be beneficial and positive for our community going forward. And we never even adopted all of the things. There were 20-something recommendations in that Race and Culture Task Force, and we did not adopt all of them to the full extent that the task force suggested that we do. And now it looks as if they're getting kind of whittled down even more. And the thing that prompted this to be necessary was a really unfortunate, tragic event in our community where a Black woman was treated poorly by police in Fort Worth. And then we had the Tatiana Jefferson situation. And these are all things that prompted the work that we did to do better. And now there's people trying to pull us back.
We're with the Anthony Johnson today now. And it's like, and our people are dying in our jails, yet we're showing up, about white replacement theory, yet Black and brown people are dying in our prisons at a higher rate with this current leadership than last leadership. It doesn't sound like the white people are getting replaced if you actually look at that. Here's it. Fort Worth City Council approved the ordinance in May 2024 for this DEI expert. One, what I think this needs to say, fact brief, and thank you Fort Worth Report for doing these, is, okay, what was the vote? I want to know, is it just was it everyone agreed? And if it was everyone agreed on this, then Fort Worth, I don't step up and do more than just saying I approve the dollars. I approve the dollars because this is what we believe in Fort Worth. And I think what Fort Worth is really frustrated at with the education level or the city management level is a lack of stepping up with values and vision of what we're building here. Everyone is silent and efficient, but we're just kind of pedaling along. And it's just like,
but is it efficient? I would say, is it efficient? Because then if they allow these attacks to come in and erode the effort, then we've put money and effort and support behind something that we then allow to be eroded away because we don't stand up and speak about the mission and the vision and what it is that we're trying to build here.
I would look at it that if Fort Worth and its moderate Republicans don't start standing up, you're going to make Fort Worth worse because you're allowing the Beau French, Tim O'Hare, Bill Wayborn language to come and be infused into your Fort Worth. You know who's not doing that? Arlington. Elisa Simmons is not allowing that. They're speaking up. There are people saying, no, that's not how Arlington's rolling. And so Fort Worth needs to say the things in order to protect it, or it's like this DEI stuff, and we could be talking about a year now and there's no DEI department in our city. And that is us going the opposite and wrong way in a chess move that shows who's winning the board. And we haven't even got to TAD in the appraisal districts, because the next thing we have to talk about is school vouchers and how that is playing into the Texas conversation as well, of what we might be dealing with in a year from now, 2 years from now. You know, no DEI task force, vouchers approved. These things are right here in front of us that are going to have ramifications to this diverse city.
And it is a diverse city. It's not about just supporting one group of people. It's not just about supporting, minorities. And as you said, it's a majority minority city now. And so it is literally about supporting the entire city. So a diversity, equity, and inclusion department and effort benefits all of us, everyone. So I don't understand that. I guess I do.
I call it the, DEI you have to, what DEI has to start doing is linking to economics. So when I talk to DEI to business people, I say it's the ignorant tax. You don't want to get the ignorant tax because you don't know what's actually going on. And so the more diverse views you have, and different people with different kind of consciousness, it allows you to not miss holes and gaps that you miss because of lack of your perspective. So it's, your ignorance tax is the cost you're going to make by just having a bunch of, cis white males making the decision, So like you have to have, just the same way you diversify your stocks and your portfolio financially, you have to do that with your friend groups and people you're around yourself. I always do a diversity audit when I walk into spaces, because then it allows me to know what I'm dealing with. And odds are, if I'm walking into a room and I'm the only non-white person, I'm realizing, okay, I'm sitting in a room that probably has really not full understanding of who I am or what this is. And so you have to have I like to walk into spaces that look like Fort Worth. Oh, there's 30% of people here are Hispanic. Wow. Okay. And I acknowledge it. And I acknowledge when there's no Hispanic people in the room, but there's white and black people advocating about Fort Worth ISD, yet half the kids are Hispanic and there's no Hispanic people in the room. So it allows us to manage our perspective and have a diverse portfolio of reality, rather than just be stuck in the thing that we always agree with.
Yeah. And it's not to give people more rights than another group. It's about equal rights, or equitable, that whole equitable, the little diagram that shows the little boxes so that people can see over the fence. If you're little and short, you need more boxes.
Yeah, I'm on like 3 boxes, because it's on. Oh, sure.
Is this going to come up every week now?
That was a good case. I'm fighting for short people, in this world. But so let's go ahead and move into the third story, which is vouchers. The Texas Tribune article came out July 29th, and it said, most Texas adults support school vouchers, new survey finds. Most respondents agreed with arguments against paying for private schools with public funds, but ultimately favored creating the program. Most Texans, the University of Houston and Texas Southern University surveyed 2,257 adults about their opinions on school voucher programs that let families use taxpayer dollars to pay for their children's private schooling and education savings accounts, a form of vouchers that state leaders like Governor Abbott have advocated for since last year. The survey respondents were able to agree with some of their most common arguments making for vouchers, including giving families more choices to pick the schools that is best for their child, while opponents worry that money could also go fail struggling public schools. And so you were reading this and you saw, there was a highlight of black adults were more supportive of school vouchers, but you also saw that it could have been how the survey was.
Yeah,
managed.
they basically say, and I think that two things can be true at the same time. Yeah. So when you ask on a survey whether you would support getting money to make decisions about your child's education that could benefit your child and whatever needs they have specifically that might be differ from others, one would probably answer that question, yes, because you're thinking about your child and what is best for your individual child, and being able to make more specific decisions for that child would be appealing to any of us. So in this case, they say Black adults were more supportive of this. Then they go on to say that they also had concerns about money being taken away from public schools. That also can be true. And so there is no reconciling in this survey reporting that I can see that says, so if you had to make a choice, which choice would you make? Would you like more money to go into your public schools so that you don't have to worry about them not being able to provide what it is that your child needs individually, and that therefore it necessitates this desire to have additional funding so that you can go to try to make those choices by yourself? It also says in here that they did not find any differentiation between rural and urban, but did they go, if it's just a survey that is not trying to take a position or sway someone's position, are these people informed about how in a rural area they may not have any place to spend those dollars that they receive to get those needs of their child specifically addressed? So I don't think it results in helping us decide what is going to be beneficial for student outcomes, if that makes sense.
Yep. And the data also showed that across party lines, majority of adults supported school vouchers. 73% of Republicans, 55% of Democrats, and 65% of independents. And I think why this narrative, why school vouchers sound good on face value to people who are not in the sauce and like in how this all is made, is that people like autonomy and freedom of choice. And that's just like always going to win in America. Like individuality of like, I get to do what's best for me and the people I care about. So like, this is why, like, I think, like, you know, indigenous Native Americans and Black people and people who have been hurt by the government in the past and feels like, you know, the system is out to, you know, actually make me worse, be more pro things like this. And that's a fair reason to want more freedom in your education. And so, like, I just think, like, what people don't like about capitalism or nationalism in the sense of creating nations is, like, we have to have some things that we all agree that is, like, at scale so that we can operationalize in large numbers. And so when you start pulling money out individually, you know, this is the same kind of talk with crypto. Crypto has the same appeal to Black and brown communities because it feels like I'm getting access to these freedoms, but it has shown that crypto has actually impacted Black and brown communities in a negative way. But I think that message really hits to a lot of people, and we don't see that ultimately when we're not all on the same page and making, like what you just said, a cohesive understanding of this is what we need to do for all, right? That we instead of me, we keep bringing up. That is where I think America is mostly failing at, is the lack of understanding the we instead of me, where I do think places like China and places that do have a more communism or government-led capitalism kind of model, I would rather be in a democracy in who we are, but the benefits of all being on the same page and the cohesion and the data and the metrics are all figured out. You are able to operationalize and move swiftly, which is why you're starting to see places like China do better research than America, faster research, faster R&D. It's because, you know, everything in America is like, if we individualize it, it's hard to commercialize the data. And when you look at these voucher programs that are started in Ohio, in Arizona, in Florida, what they're really seeing is like, they don't know how to measure it because, okay, let's say a family lives in Florida and took the dollars and, you know, but now, you know, halfway in the year lives in New Hampshire, you know, or, you know, what happens?
Well, and they don't have any say over some of those other schools. So how would they go and track a student that went to a school that then the government doesn't have any ability to monitor and get feedback and results about how that kid did in that location? Yeah. So how do you continue to track until you get to a place where you have grown adults that are not thriving because the education system failed them.
Yeah.
So we don't want it to get to that point for sure.
Yeah. And I actually, while being out, one of the places I was spending time in was an education commissions of the state conference, where it's a invite only. It's the 50 commissioners of each state, and then kind of vendors and partners, and which why I was able to be there. But they had a whole session on the voucher programs, and basically today, none of these voucher programs are taking money from schools today. They are R&D projects that Florida, Ohio, Arizona are doing. But what they're finding is that 60 to 70% of the people who are taking advantage of these state voucher programs are people who are already in private school. But so basically what's happening is like the Florida model has cost the state $2 billion to do this test because they're paying for a bunch of private school kids
that were already in private school.
Yeah, money. And so these examples, Arizona's was $900 million. But basically there's a lot of money being invested to families that could have gone to public school. New money that could have gone. But currently, and that's kind of where the lay of the land. But there's a lot of ways that they talk about. One of the interesting things that they talked about is how they're in Arizona, they're looking at the school district actually being a part of the voucher services. So if I'm a homeschool kid or a private school kid and at a school of 100 kids, but I want my kid to play football, I can pay $2,000 to my public school to be a part of the athletics program.
So you could use the voucher money to go play sports at a public school?
Correct. And the public school gets that dollars. So they're talking about basically public schools trying to find ways to still provide the services that they do to these families, but now families are buying into these services. Which, yeah, I mean, again, we're at a very early time in how all of this looks, but it's also like concerning in a way, because to me, in order to be fast and powerful as a country, it's us being cohesive on what we all agree on that needs to be institutionalized and ran correctly. And I think, like, right, freedom of religion makes a lot of sense. Believe in how you want to live, be freedom to marry who you want to marry, freedom to be who you want to be. The government doesn't tell you what to work, but like there still needs to be some things we decide on, like education, that we all agree in a mission statement. We all agree in the goal of what we're trying to accomplish here in America. And education needs to be the thing, like also healthcare. There's things that need to be institutionalized and that we all are understanding the goals together.
And are available to everyone.
Yes, and available to everyone so that we understand our part in the group. And so this whole voucher thing is allowing people to take money. Then you're getting exploited by some consumerism education company who's going to give your kid a laptop, who's going to give your kid all these toys, and you think it's good for you because now a big package showed up to your house with virtual learning services, and it's a computer, headphones, and all this stuff. Your kid just got Christmas off of voucher dollars, but then there's no instruction, accountability, curriculum, and 6 months later, your kid isn't actually learning anything, but you feel like you got a lot of toys. And so it's pretty interesting. And we've talked about how nervous we are for public education a gajillion times. And we might even have people on the show.
Yes, we've had a couple people. I always hesitate to speak too much about the education sector just because do not believe myself to be any much of an expert at all in it. But we've got a few people that we've talked to that might come on as guests coming up soon. So hopefully we can get some expertise in this area.
We are now also going to get into the big story, which is basically the big story for us is around, right? We talked about the power of Tarrant County and the power of Fort Worth and how we need more advocating and people standing up for Fort Worth's values to the Tarrant County people. This next phase is about how Tarrant County's power has changed the appraisal district's kind of flow and how we get our appraised value on our homes. We're going to talk about what those look like and what the consequences could be. But we're also going to talk about how we're at Fort Worth. Our city manager, David Cooke, is retiring after 10 years being in the post. And so really we're at this interesting spot of how do we budget and fund a city if we're now limiting tax values, but then also David Cooke's legacy of being a fiscally responsible, budget tight person. Is that healthy for what we need for our next leadership and what we need as a growing dynamic city who needs to build and grow up into a metroplex that we can be a part of the metroplex and compete with the Friscos, the McKinneys of the world. So,
in speaking about the appraisal district's decisions, we had several guests and we've talked a lot about the new members of the Tarrant County Appraisal Board, and that they made some campaign promises about some changes that they were going to make as soon as they got into office. And they have come in and attempted to make some of those changes. Not all of them to the full extent of their campaign promises, but I think that was because of some level-headed pushback and some deep diving by the staff at the appraisal district to kind of point out unintended consequences. But several of their initiatives have been made, and there are some unintended consequences, I think, is what we're coming to find out. There's a Fort Worth Report article titled Tarrant School Districts Fear Consequences of New Appraisal Tax Plan. Basically, they've already voted on this, and I'm not sure if how many of these people showed up at the public meeting to express these concerns ahead of the vote, and how many of them maybe showed up at a subsequent meeting. But they are pointing out that there's going to be some economic challenges faced by various ISDs in Tarrant County because of the changes that the Tarrant County Appraisal Board has put in place. Specifically, Crowley pointed out that these changes could impact the district's ability to complete its voter-approved $1 billion bond. So bonds are put into place, and they are based on projections going forward of appraisals and the taxes that will be collected based on those appraisals. And now that a change has been put in place with how often those appraisals can happen, and therefore making it every 2 years instead of every 1 year, those projections may be impacted. And they also put in place a 5% valuation cap instead of 10% valuation cap, which also could impact those valuations. So these bonds are in place. They have committed to pay them. And if the funding is not available from the way they projected them, they're indicating that there could be a need to figure out another way to pay them. And the only other thing that they have at their disposal is to raise taxes, which is something that everybody was trying to avoid.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Emily Wolf at the Fort Worth Report. She's done a great job just tracking this story and putting in a lot of work. You can just tell with it. I mean, her first story on July 22nd was after the Monday during their first meeting. Understand, this was their first official meeting together, and they made this kind of progress. So I just want to kind of talk about, there was a trio of new members, Matt Bryant, Eric Morris, and Callie Rigney, all funded and backed by Tim O'Hare and endorsed, and they all won. And they ran on the platform of capping residential appraisal increases at 5% and limiting appraisals to once every 3 years. The agreement was, like you said, every 2 years was the middle ground. But there was even people talking about how they, like I believe Chief Appraiser Joe Don Babbitt, who says, like, I'm really concerned how fast you are moving on your agenda, and like what research, what thought process have been made here. And it really feels like what ultimately I think what his focus is. Tim O'Hare has aspirations, and everyone has said that, like, to go further than the county. Like, he wants to get further and bigger, and to do something like this gives him his base, right? A lot of his base is the cut my property tax people. And that's a larger base of people in Tarrant County.
I mean, I don't know anybody that goes around saying, please raise my property taxes.
Yeah.
Nobody is saying that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's an understanding of what it is you're asking of your government to provide you and what it is that you're wanting them to do that with.
Here's what people need to understand is like your taxes are raising on your property because you are a good steward of your dollars and you picked a property that is growing. When you grow value, right, demand for your land becomes higher. So if you don't want your property taxes to increase, then your house value has to also stay the same as when you bought it in 1967. You can't, like, that's the thing is, but here's the power of growth. When your house was worth 80 grand in 1967 and now it's worth 480 grand today, the power of more revenue is you get to live a higher quality of life as a person. And so now services get to you, like bus routes, like roads, like whatever the things you want. And so those taxes are getting bigger because we are growing into a more mature place to live. And when you become, a bigger entity, right? When Apple started in the garage, they don't operate who they are today, right? And so you are now a growing asset, Tarrant County, and you can't get mad at, it'd be like running a business and being like, oh, I only started this to make 5 hamburgers, but now I can make 20 hamburgers, but I don't want to spend all the money to grow my grill because, I don't want the growth tax on my business. This is just a part of existing and growing and living.
Well, and that comment you made about making decisions quickly and not knowing what all the consequences were, there's a quote in here from Bobbitt where he says he's now trying to convene a group in Tarrant County to gain perspective on this proposed initiative. And his emphasis is the district's appraisal and the relationship to the staff. And so what popped into my head is just like people who are elected, who have expertise in a variety of things. They may work in one field or another field. There's no requirement for them to have expertise in a certain field. And especially those that have been elected in these roles, they're citizens, and that's the role they're playing on this board. They really need to get information from the people who are experts before they go running around making these decisions. It's like the legislature making decisions about health and women's bodies without talking to doctors. Yeah. It's all very frustrating. I don't think that I want legislators who represent the people, who are elected by the people, to represent us by listening to us, but I also want them to dive into the necessary information to know what the impact is of the decisions that they're making from people who are experts in those fields.
Yeah. And you also, if I remember correctly, Lee Henderson, when he ran for this seat and was on our pod, he talked about, if I'm not winning, there's no one actually Fort Worth represented.
Yeah, everybody, all of those individuals that are the citizens' voices are not from Fort Worth. Yeah. There isn't any.
So Fort Worth has no voice right now in all of this. And here's an example of Tarrant County and Fort Worth it's not one and the same. Fort Worth, you're half of the county's population, so you are call it what you are. You are the moderate side of this county, and now you're not in the appraisal stuff. They're sweeping into your DEI stuff. They're allowing their leadership to live in extremism, as ours live with their tail between their legs. And so this is just a part of like moving into the next part of this story, which is about David Cooke's retirement. We need Fort Worth leaders who have a vision and values that they'll advocate and stand up for. And I think David Cooke, whatever people think of his legacy, I'm afraid that we're going to just fill in more of that worked for us back in the day, but it's not going to work for us in 2024. Obviously, you were a council member while David Cooke was also in office. What is your experience of his of just working with him and sharing the legacy of David Cooke?
I was not on the council when David Cooke was hired. So he was hired by a council before me. And in this article, it points out that the only council member who is still on the city council presently that was part of the council that hired him is Gina Bivens from District 5. But David and I had our very first council meetings together because I got elected at exactly the same time he started as the city manager. And our very first council meeting lasted until 1 o'clock in the morning because there were quite a few controversial items on that agenda and there were a lot of people signed up to speak. And so we got thrown right into the fire of leading in this city on the very first council meeting that I had in 2014. I think that what many people have pointed out is that David came from jobs previously that had a big focus on budget and balanced budget. And, you know, he came in at a time when we had a very big issue with our pension plan. And that is a really hard thing to manage and deal with because there's people who were hired with expectations of their pensions being a certain way. And there was some issues with whether or not that pension could continue. And so there was some definite decisions that needed to be made. Other cities got those decisions taken out of their control and the state took over. And in Fort Worth, that didn't happen. But there was definitely some very challenging decisions to be made at the beginning of all of this around the pension. And then David has been really focused on budget and having everything kind of pencil out. And so as you said, and this article points out in the title, David is retiring as the city manager, and this paves the way for a new era of Fort Worth leadership. So he's served 10 years, which is apparently a very long time in city management roles. Gina points out in here that she calls David a dinosaur because in the world of city government, city managers don't usually survive this long.
Do you have insight on how this works on selecting a new city manager? Can you talk to us about like what's next for the city on how this might work?
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't there for the hiring of David, but I do have a general understanding of how this works. And I'm a little curious about the timing because he did indicate that he's going to be done in February. And then we have municipal elections coming up in May. And so I would be surprised if they were going to try to find somebody before the May elections, because in the May elections, there could be some change in representation. And so I don't think it would necessarily be a great idea, unless they're all very sure that they're going to get reelected, that they make a decision and then some of them are no longer there and hire a new city manager. So I don't know for sure what their timeline is going to be. This article speaks to it, several of them indicating that they were surprised that he was announcing that he's retiring. So I don't think they've necessarily got a plan in place right now. But the city manager is a position that is hired by the city council. There's like 4 positions that the city council hires, and city manager, city attorney, city auditor. I would think that they would probably do a nationwide search. We have 5 assistant city managers, and one of them is the deputy city manager presently. So my guess would be that the deputy would be in an interim role during the hiring process or during the search process. With us being the 12th largest city in the country, I can't imagine that we would just automatically go with an assistant city manager and have them move up into the city manager role. I think we would want to avail ourselves of a nationwide search. And then the question is, what are we looking for in a new city manager? And when I was asked the question, I had an opinion for sure. And that is that I would really like someone to be very kind of progressive, forward thinking about all of this growth and not necessarily just be like, woo, all this growth is coming. We're growing. I want much more intentionality around how that growth is and manage, as the title of the job describes, manage that growth.
Yeah, the deputy city manager is Mark McDaniel. Mark McDaniel includes basically has 35 years experience in city management, spanning 7 different communities, ranging in population from 8,000 to 1.3, has been appointed deputy city manager in January 2024. So he's new to to that role, but after his time as city manager for Kerrville, Texas, McDaniel joined Strategic Government Resources, a senior vice president, So this person's relatively new. He also created and provided direct leadership for the Dallas Center for Performance Excellence. During his 10 years as city manager for the city of Tyler, he was the architect for culture change that included extensive use of Lean Six Sigma methodologies and innovative leadership structure, rigorous strategic business planning. So I don't know. Seems very.
Well, I've met with him, and I know he does have an eye towards planning. So I do believe that he has, a good head on his shoulders and has good expertise and experience in various size cities across the state of Texas.
Also, I want to note that the city manager oversees Fort Worth's $2.6 billion budget. That is over twice as big as the Tarrant County's budget. And we have 8,100 city employees. So this goes back to the drum I continue to want to share, is that Fort Worth is half of Tarrant County's population. Our budget and the money we manage in this area is over twice as much than what Tarrant County gets to work with. But this whole city manager culture creates quiet backdoor politics rather than champion leaders up front, because our mayor doesn't really have a lot of power, but our mayor can say some things if there's enough go ahead around the people with power. But it's just like, I just think like these people have to, like you said, have a vision of values that they're advocating, defending, and supporting, and the money is being invested based on how we see Fort Worth needs to be, and that we're willing to fight for that Fort Worth, especially against the Tarrant County people or whatever the case may be, the state and Abbott. And let's say, right, Abbott says we want to cancel DEI programs. All right, Fort Worth, stand up and say, I just gave $150,000 for a consultant because we at Fort Worth believe in, as a majority minority city, what Abbott sees in his numbers does not align with the numbers we have. So this is something we have to invest in. Yeah. There needs to be a much more vocalization and less, oh, I'm just an innocent, polished, guy behind the scenes, and I'm just here to make sure there's no ruckus.
It's really funny because I've gotten into several debates with different people about the question about a city manager form of government and a strong mayor form of government. And as someone who has been city staff and as someone who is educated as a city planner, I always saw the value in a city manager form of government. I mean, as long as you have a really good city manager who is doing things for the right reason. I always felt like having that expertise was good, and also having that continuity over election cycles. Whereas in Fort Worth, we have election cycles every 2 years. I've been watching recently what's happened in Houston, where they have a strong mayor form of government, and I never was really paying that much attention, but I watched this current mayor come in and overturn a whole bunch of initiatives that I thought were really important initiatives, like Safe Streets initiatives, and entire departments be basically decimated because he has a different direction that he plans to go in. And so, I mean, literally, I've argued with planners about this. There's some planners that really think that this strong mayor is a great way to go, because if you have a great strong mayor that comes in with a strong vision about what they want to accomplish, they can maybe get that done more quickly than working through the bureaucracy of a city manager form of government.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it both ways. I mean, it kind of is like, in a way, like as a person who didn't know this information maybe like 5 years ago, like voting, you thought like, oh, the mayor's the most powerful person. Like most people don't realize, no, they're just the puppets to the show in a city manager role. And so,
but I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, they're just the talking. They're the talking voice, but they're not. They don't have the.
The mayor and the city manager put the agenda for the meetings together.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think
so.
That
it's more.
And the
inclusive.
mayor and the council can fire the city manager. So
yeah, which they had the opportunity with him getting on PJs with the Basses, which is a conflict of interest, right? And
instead they just told him he couldn't be a part of any decisions in downtown anymore, which I'm not sure how that works. But another assistant city manager, I guess, is in charge of those decisions.
And but if you did the mayoral way, I would think you would have to. To me, you would have to give the mayor more years, so like turn into a 4-year position rather than 2.
2 years is crazy.
Yeah.
I think 2 years is crazy. We've talked in charter conversations before about changing that, and unfortunately, the charter committee didn't recommend that.
Yeah.
We've also talked about the fact that everybody's up every 2 years, which means that the entire council could change over in one election, which has never really happened because it's hard to unseat an incumbent, but it still could happen. So those kind of discussions have gone on, and people have just chosen not to change that.
What I like about the mayoral one is you're getting the most voice from the people who what they want, right? Someone's casting a vision and a business plan for the city. People are getting up on their feet and voting for that person's plan. So, like, to me, you don't get that kind of feedback from what your people wants outside of a mayoral election. Like, that's where the most people vote, speak up, and share who they want to be. And so that definitely does and should hold weight on how we move.
But then you have mayors that change their stripes right in the middle of their
and then that's when
service.
Yeah.
And
like
then they're like, are they really representing what you
like
said?
Dallas mayor, right?
Yeah.
And no, but so anyways, like my whole thing is that Fort Worth, if I was given the opportunity to stand in front on a stage to all the most important people in Fort Worth, my conversation would be, what got us here won't get us where we need to go. We are moving in an ever-evolving, growing metroplex, and the data is showing that when you look at growth in the metroplex, we are getting dusted by DFM, Dallas, Frisco, McKinney. And if we want to stay a part of the conversation with a part of the rail, a part of all these amenities, we want to be a part of conversations with Dickies Arena for sport teams or whatever, we have to start being a city that people start learning about, because we have inclusive, passionate, visionary leadership who is selling a vision to the Metroplex, to America, that this is a place that has its own identity and values that we invest and set a business plan forward for, that gets people excited. If we just continue to be the penny pinchers who then gives each other high fives because we have stayed the same,
and then reduced our tax rate every single year, except for one in the last 12 years.
Yeah, while we continue to grow, that's not how you build. That's not how you build in the Metroplex, where there's many other options and many other cities who are more proud and more investing in those spaces. So that's just my thing. It's like this whole quiet leadership stuff is just, I don't think can work for Fort Worth, because Fort Worth is why I live here. It is a hidden gem, but it's a hidden gem that more people should know. It's a 12th largest city. It is its own thing, but we just like to sit and play nice and play like we're a small town. And like our small towns, Fort Worth might not be seen a part of the Texas Triangle. I know we say we're a part of the Texas Triangle because it's the Metroplex, but when you really look at the triangle's under the Dallas point. The point of the top of that triangle goes towards Dallas, right?
Yeah,
it's
we have to scream all the time to get them to say Dallas, Fort Worth.
Same with San Antonio, right? Because it's Austin, Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio is kind of the bottom left of that triangle, right? And so we are not nearly doing as good as a job as San Antonio is as making its own voice and brand of what they want to be in Texas.
They have a great mayor. I will have to. I mean, I'm not saying anything against our mayor by saying that, but I do think that the San Antonio mayor does a fabulous job.
Yeah. And that's just where we are and what we need from our leadership. I don't want quiet, moderate Republicans anymore. I want inclusive, thoughtful Republicans who have dignity. And I understand that maybe, I'm not going to get my candidate. And if that's okay, but I want someone who knows that, man, we are purple. And because we're purple, we have dignity. We can talk to each other. We can make decisions. And hate, extremism is not accepted. And currently, Tarrant County is the epicenter of extremism. And that's the first thing we got to take off of our list. Alrighty, now we're going to move into wins and losses. We start with our losses so we can end on a win. And what is your loss?
Okay, so you know how I'm famous for merging my wins and losses together. I do want to make it clear that this organization that I'm talking about is a great win for this city. There is a organization called Mercy Clinic of Fort Worth, and they are going to be expanding their free healthcare to more Southside neighborhoods. And that is definitely a good thing. The only loss is that every time this topic comes up, I have people asking me if Mercy Clinic is connected to Mercy culture, and it is not. It's actually connected to Travis Avenue Baptist Church, which is located at the corner of Hemp Hill and Berry Street. And they are building a new clinic in an area there. They've had a clinic in that area. They've served specific zip codes for a long period of time. They provide medical, dental, and in-house pharmaceutical and spiritual care to uninsured adults residing in various zip codes. But they are going to be expanding that to some additional zip codes. So that's a win. But
They got to change their name.
they had their name way before.
I know, but then someone else took it and marketed it better. I'm sorry. Like,
I don't know. I haven't heard from them about whether this has caused a problem. And this is very anecdotal for me to say that every time I talk about Mercy
just call
Clinic,
it Empathy Clinic. There you go. You
Empathy
just
Clinic.
There
We've
you
given
go.
them a new name.
Just make it different. No, but that does stink, because when you sent that to me, I'm like, uh-oh. But then you had
So
to
you asked me.
Yeah.
I sent it to you and you asked me.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
So my loss is Keller ISD and Grapevine, Colleyville are banning phones on campuses. You're seeing this happening all across the country. I am not against the phone ban in schools for education. That's not necessarily the loss. I think the loss is, like our city, our education leaders do not have vision and instead are very reactionary to fear. And the current thing is that the nationwide epidemic is kids' usage of phones and their mental health. I believe that what we need to really be doing is understanding that the phone is the new device, right? Like, you and I grew up in a world where we had two versions of ourselves, our professional self and our personal self. Our professional self was our school and our work life. Our personal self was our family and our community life. Kids today live in three worlds. They live in their personal life, their professional life, and their digital life. And they kind of walked and pioneered and existed on a piece of land called the digital state, with network states of Amazon's, of Facebook's and Google's, and they're trying to pioneer and operationalize what it looks like to add this third reality in our space as humanity. So I say all of this because the way we have created typing class for computers, we need to create swiping classes for phones and teaching kids how to use phones responsibly, integrate curriculum around phone management, how to utilize phones the same way we had for typing class. And we need to do the same thing that we did for driver's ed, right? When we said the roads were dangerous for teenagers, we didn't ban them driving to school. Instead, we taught them how to drive on roads. We have to be able to do that and create the driver's ed of phone education, because where we continue to miss is that we look at outdated research and we say, oh, we need to give every kid a one-to-one device. And we spent billions upon billions of dollars on Google Chromebooks, and the phone generation woke us up and we realized they don't even know how to use these Chromebooks. They don't even care to use them, and they're good with their phone. And so this is the example of a bunch of 50 and 60-year-olds who listen to 56-year-old researchers and they think they got something down, but you have to have vision in the unknown. And if you only base your goals off of research, the research can tell you what's working today, and that doesn't mean life works like that 10 years from now. So there has to be some casting of vision of how we manage phones in our education system, and banning them completely isn't the answer. And so I say that's the loss.
So you mentioned previously, when we were just kind of discussing this, something about the ages at which certain restrictions would be in place, like 13 to get a phone, 16 for social media, and something else.
I highly recommend everyone who is listening to this pod to read a book that a lot of this is happening because Jonathan Haidt, I think is his name, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic on Mental Illness. It was published in March 26. The book came out. It has boomed as a New York Times #1 bestseller. Discussions and policies of states. Alabama's congresswoman was really big about this book. Arkansas, excuse me. And so New York in New York school district banning phones, LA banning phones. It's bipartisan support on what he talks about. And there's 4 parts in the book. He talks about how no phones in schools. He said no phones to kids up until 13. So no kid should get a phone. No social media until 16. But the final one that it was is that by the time a kid is 16, they have the autonomy and freedom to choose what they want from their phone access, meaning no more parent consent forms after 16. So what crazy is all the conservative people who are jumping for this guy's research, they're not realizing that a part of what he says is that we're overprotective of kids in physical worlds and underprotective in digital worlds. But if we help them actually learn how to be humans before digital natives, then once they do have the capacity, we should allow them the freedom to pick how they operate on their phone.
I feel so affirmed because this is literally how we ran our raising of our kids. Like, we didn't let them have phones till they were 16, till they were 13. They swore to us that they were the only ones that didn't have cell phones. And then I think with my first child, I was much more protective on the social media, access to the internet stuff than I was my second child. But yeah, I think that's very interesting. I definitely am going to go.
And I think the book is. I think the book he comes from a very like he's a nativist, like in the sense of like, you know, humans aren't wired for these phones, like we grew up with fire and, you know, blank blank blank. Like he really goes back to the animalistic versions of sapiens. And all I believe is that our kids today are growing up with a third world, a third reality, their digital world, where there's going to be friends, there's going to be community, and they're spending more and more time on there, right? Kids spend the same amount of time on their phone as they do in class. And so they're living in 2 school days. And we, as people who think just the phone is completely bad, it's really it's the new...
It's a tool and how you use it.
Yeah, and it's almost like the world is already populated and there's no new frontier in the world, right? We know all parts of the world. The internet is the new Mayflower going across the ocean, and kids are landing in unknown lands, and they have no idea how to manage or be citizens or be respectful to each other. And we're going through that right now. And I think our jobs as adults is to help them because we're not them. Like they don't know life before the cell phone. Yeah. So we can help them stay honest to being a human, but they're most likely going to live in a world where you know, back in the day, there used to be Neanderthals and Homo erectus all living at the same time. They're going to be living with Homo technologists, more non-biological conscious things. And that's a world they're going to have to live in. And they're going to meet those things on these devices. And so you can't like hide that that's coming. And that's just a world like you and I will not be here for that world. But like that's the world that they're going to have to exist in. And we could be harming them by shunning this device rather than supporting them on how to navigate it.
It's funny because, you know, that whole thing about when you travel and meet people, you can't be racist. You'll learn about other people and other cultures. But our children are traveling and meeting people through these devices.
Yep.
And because we're not as well versed with it, like you just said, we are unable to help them navigate that. Because my first reaction when my kid was telling me that they have real relationships on their phone and with people they've never met in their lives was to be like, that can't be a real friendship. But it really is. And I have had to educate myself and figure out that that's something that they need to learn how to navigate. And I might not be the person that can help them navigate that.
Yeah, and that's the phone. I try to go back to like when we had the Mayflower, people getting on ships, and there was a lot of things that went wrong in that situation. But when people did that, a lot of people died. We didn't say middle of the ocean, hey, we're going to ban ship travel, and everyone, you need to stay back to what we were. And that's where we kind of kids are with these phones. They're in the middle of the ocean, dealing with this thing. And yeah, there's a lot of bad that we're managing, mental health crisis, bullying. But the answer isn't let's go back. The answer is how do we help them navigate that? As the best as our ability of people who won't have that responsibility. And that should be the narrative.
And
And
it shouldn't be 60, 70, and 80-year-olds
Yeah.
trying to figure that out.
Yeah. So, but anyways, that's my loss. We still got wins to do. What is your win?
So my win, it's funny because my win is that the city of Fort Worth is set to purchase the historic building in downtown for a downtown library branch. The former Center for Transforming Lives, and before that, the YWCA, is a building downtown Fort Worth that I believe has historic designation on all three levels, local, state, and federal. And the Center for Transforming Lives is moving to a new campus that is currently under construction where they will be able to expand their services greatly and continue to do great work. And this historic building, which is already off the tax rolls because it is owned by a nonprofit, is up for sale, and the city of Fort Worth is going to vote on August 13th whether or not to purchase this to be the new downtown library. Many of you remember that they closed the downtown library. I was not opposed to that. That was an underutilized block. It was not a great building for the downtown library. This I find to be very interesting, and my hope would be, while other cities are building kind of new state-of-the-art central libraries, Austin has an incredible new state-of-the-art central library. Arlington has a new downtown library that seems, I haven't been inside, but from the outside seems very, prominent and new and shiny. If we're going to be putting a library into a historic building, I think it's a real incredible chance to highlight historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and state-of-the-art library facility delivery programming. Because as you and I just talked about with these changes to digital and phones, books with buildings with books are not necessarily the same definition of what you can get at a library. There are so many things you can get at a library. And this could be an incredibly awesome opportunity to both do historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and deliver state-of-the-art library technology and facilities in the urban core of our city. So I'm really glad that they saw the need for continuing to have a library presence in downtown. I'm a little worried about this narrative about it's not a central library anymore. It's just another branch in downtown. I would like them to be a little more visionary about this.
This goes back to instead they're budgeting, right? This is the thing. It's like they're high-fiving because now we checked it off the box. We have a central branch. It's basic. It's Manila, and if that's the vision, you're right. That would be unfortunate because, like you said, there's an opportunity to show a world-class reuse example.
But I'm absolutely in favor of them purchasing this building.
Yes.
I think it's the right move to do, and I think that it's not too late to kind of consider some of these other things and do more. And if it has to be done in phases, to be fiscally responsible, I totally understand that as well. Yeah. So I just thought that was very cool. I recommended to a friend to take her granddaughter to the new children's library, and they went this weekend and got her a library card, and she sent me pictures, and I'm just all jazzed up about libraries all over again.
Yeah. Like you said, like the libraries makes it equitable for everyone to have access to this digital world that is opportunity. So many people, when I go to my branch, the amount of people who are on the computers, searching stuff, applying for stuff, looking for jobs, printing stuff, it's a resource to this digital world. And so,
not to mention the partnership they have with supporting music in Fort Worth. There is the Amplify 817, and they're having an event coming up. So I'll give you that information as well so that people know to go and attend Amplify 817.
I love that. My win is pitting a bow on like the purpose of this, of what Fort Worth needs, and that is Republican leaders fighting against extremism. And so in Arizona, John Giles, a mayor, says he's wrote an opinion piece on AZ Central saying, "Why, as a Republican mayor, I support Kamala Harris over Trump." Mesa, Arizona is not a small city. It's the 36th biggest city in the country. And so this guy is showcasing that he probably also lives in a purple city. And he's also understanding that Harris is a competent leader. He's saying what what Trump is supporting and wanting to do is not how we stand together. It's the far right agenda is extreme, and it's solely visioned for individuals to stay in power. He is standing up against extremism. And so that gives me hope, and it's a win that there are some conscious, thoughtful Republicans out there who can see what we're dealing with and managing. And I think Mayor Parker and our council members who identify as Republican should really start taking steps into this model like John Giles did in Arizona. All right, beautiful people, here we have it. That was a full episode of the 817 podcast. We're going to keep them coming to you. I know we're going to have a lot going on. We're getting into busy season for myself, and so there's a lot of traveling, but we just went through our entire schedule to December 1st because, as we know, we got the November election as well. We're trying to get guests on, so we're continuing trying to make this special. So shout out to every one of you who listen to us, and we really want to continue to be your weekly source so that you can get the right information and the right mindset as you change the world.
Dopamine, swipe, follow us like double tap. Now they control your life, control your life.